God damn it, Paradox, why didn't you give us a release date? Why could it not be in a month? And why was it late and not me? Oh god, why wasn't it me? Wouldn't you know it, and who could have thought? Project Caesar turned out to be Europa Universalis V to nobody's surprise, and yet to everyone's incredible delight. After 12 years all the way back in 2013, the fact that Paradox is officially releasing EU5 is honestly insane to think about, because over the past decade we have sunk thousands upon thousands of hours into EU4, and I think we're all ready for the next big thing by now. As such, I'm sure you're just as hyped as I am for EU5 to finally arrive, and to celebrate this announcement, let's take a look at what EU5 is all about, what we know so far, and why this is going to be strategy gaming's next big thing. Europa Universalis V is a new grand strategy game from Paradox Development Studios, a sequel to EU4, which means rather than being mostly character focused like CK3 or military focused like Hearts of Iron 4, EU5 focused more on the leading of the state. However, much more than EU4, EU5 takes inspiration from both Imperator Rome and Victoria 3, and takes a much deeper approach to populations, social groups and cultures, resources, and indeed implements a comprehensive new trade system with actual trade routes and strategic locations. EU5 is developed by Paradox Tinto, a Paradox studio created after the release of Imperator Rome, essentially after that game kinda failed. Luckily, Tinto learned from their experience with Imperator, and the reason we already know so much about the game is proof of this. You see, we have dozens upon dozens of dev diaries on what was Project Caesar exactly because Paradox Tinto understood that player feedback and setting expectations is a great way to introduce your game to the most loyal fans. But let's get down to business. EU5 takes place in the early modern, colonial, and industrial revolution periods, including major events like the Black Plague, which is going to be interesting, the Ottoman invasion of the Byzantine Empire, the 30 Years' War, and the French Revolution. Now, if you're used to EU4 like everyone else, you might be a little shocked and a little turned on by the fact that EU5 actually turns the clock back an entire century and begins in 1337. This has multiple implications for our beautiful map. Rather than being little more than a city-state, the Byzantine Empire now has legs to stand on. The Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt is the single most powerful Islamic empire, France mostly remains in control of its lands before England arrives in full, and the Teutonic Order is an actual force to be reckoned with in Eastern Europe. At the same time, the Mongol Golden Horde has yet to weaken and remains a major power in Eurasia, and importantly, if you thought the Holy Roman Empire was fragmented in EU4, wait until you see it in EU5, when there is literally 357 different states. On launch, EU4 had 35. Just the freaking Holy Roman Empire has 357 states in it. Believe it. In other words, while EU5 feels fairly similar to EU4, the move 100 years into the past has serious implications, and I actually love that we're getting a sequel that dares to change things up this way. The time difference and new map might not be the most important changes in EU5 though. In fact, it might just be the least important, because EU5 aims to more or less completely change what it means to play EU. Whereas EU4 focused mostly on the government and the state as the focal point of gameplay, EU5 evolves this concept by adding the deepest pop system since Imperator Rome and Victoria 3. EU4 is actually the greatest strategy game I know that does not include a true population system, but instead deals with manpower and percentage values. But in EU5, populations return, and they're made up of different social classes like the nobles, clergy, the burghers, peasants, tribesmen, and slaves, and they all further belong to different cultures and religions. We even have migration, literacy, satisfaction, and population access to goods, all of which should remind you of the pop system in Victoria 3. In other words, our pops will directly tie in with the resource system, a system that sees goods change hands through an intricate trade system spanning the globe, which is actually dynamically impacted by supply and demand. In EU4, resources were much more tied to provinces and the empire that controlled them, while trade was more a matter of routes and naval power rather than actual trade. This is probably the single most important thing that has me hyped for EU5, because it ensures that this won't be just an EU4 2, but a completely new experience. Like EU4 though, EU5 continues the concept of estates, like the nobility and the clergy, alongside yourself, the royal power. Here you'll have to balance each estate's internal power in the realm, and it will all have effects on laws, reforms, and your government efficiency. Militarily, and I know this is an important point for many, army units make a grand return, and yes, they can be moved independently on the map. This time, however, the army system is deepened compared to EU4, where it was relatively simple, and now includes things like a new form of organization, meaning that armies are divided into center, left flank, right flank, and reserves. We have new combat phases including bombard phases, and we even have a system of strategic deployment, which will be very interesting to try out for ourselves. Additionally, an entirely new system of foraging and movement through specific territory will bring a ton of new tactical and strategic opportunities as well, and supply will now mean a lot more for both attacker and defender, since cutting off the supplies for enemy nations, or having your own cut off, is now a valid and possible tactic, making types of asymmetrical warfare a viable strategy. In other words, while it feels like the core of EU4's system is intact, it's definitely been given a much needed revamp, and might even feel kind of similar to what we have in Imperator Rome to an extent. Indeed, if I had to say one thing about EU5, it is that it feels like Paradox Tinto's and Johan's true vision of Imperator Rome realized. A grand, hopefully more polished, and improved next generation version of it. I mean, it's certainly larger, not only spanning the entire world, but allegedly featuring over 20,000 locations, likely each with their own resources and populations. Importantly, and this is something EU4 also did well, is EU5's division of its approximately 400 to 500 years of history into so-called ages. These including the Age of Traditions, Age of Renaissance, Age of Discovery, Reformation, Absolutism, and Revolutions. In other words, each of these tell us something about what these likely 100-year periods will offer, and I'm excited to see how Paradox Tinto approaches them this time around. How all of this will impact countries and empires outside of Europe is also exciting, and one must really wonder how EU5 will stand up against EU4 in terms of content after all these years. But I think Paradox has done something smart here, because by changing up so much of its core gameplay, EU5 will likely have its very own identity, and hopefully not become what CK3 was on launch in comparison to the very similar CK2. When it eventually releases, I suppose, which sadly, due to the lack of a release date, is probably going to be all the way into sometime next year, if we're lucky. But when I do, you know I'm going to let you know exactly what it's like to play. I am just so excited for EU5, it has been such a long time coming, and I cannot wait to get my hands on it. And when I do, you know I'm going to let you know exactly what it's like to play. If you're interested in EU5 as well, make sure to like this video, leave your comment, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much to Lathe for the amazing cameo, and make sure to watch the full EU5 showcase as well if you want to see the presentation in full. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.